Hello and welcome to Lesson 6 of Global Development. This session is going to be looking at a variety of things that you can do to, or that countries can do to help arrest or change some of the impacts of uneven development. And before we start, it's always worth having a bit of a recap in your book. Now, the recap that's going to go on the screen says to have a discussion, and you can't really have a discussion if you're learning from home. So when it comes to recapping uneven development from last lesson, I want you to go back into your notes just to see, first and foremost, how the world is unevenly developed globally, and also how places like the UK specifically are unevenly developed, and some of the reasons why. So some of the physical reasons why uneven development takes place, some of the historical and political reasons, and some of the economic reasons that lead to uneven development. Then I also want you to look at your mind map which you completed last lesson, just to make sure you've got a good long list of, with a bit of detail, some of the impacts of uneven development. So some of the negative drawbacks associated with uneven development. Okay. Once you've had a little recap and a refresh of that, it's the impacts that I want you to think about, because we're now going to start addressing some of those impacts. We're going to work out ways that countries can try and solve or resolve uneven development. And that's what this session is really all about. So this session is divided into kind of two slots. The first slot today, we're going to be looking at kind of the more at types of aid and ways to help places that are really struggling. And then we're going to look at something called top-down development, which is a project really, or top-down projects, which are things that you can try and help resolve uneven development. We're also going to look next session at bottom-up development, which is another kettle of fish altogether. Okay, so over the next couple of lessons, it's all about tackling uneven development within countries, or globally as well. Okay, so we're going to start by just giving you a definition of what aid is. Okay, an aid is when you lend assistance to a country or a community, so it can be within that country as well, who is in need. Now, when it comes to uneven development and some of the problems associated with uneven development, you'll know that those communities that have that issue are in need. They need something to help resolve their issue, and an aid essentially is giving assistance in some form. Now, often, if it's a country that is trying to develop, so nationally speaking, that aid takes the form of money. It's transferred financially, government to government, or from organisations and corporations to that country, or money lent by things like the World Bank, for example. But it might not necessarily just be financial. It might involve goods, for example, water and food, shelter, but it also might include things like skills and knowledge. Educated engineers or doctors and people with expertise might be really, really useful for certain types of situation. So aid is given by wealthier countries or wealthy organisations or charity organisations to those that are less developed and have a need for it. That's really kind of the definition of why you'd need aid. And there are many situations where aid might need to be given, which I'm going to outline next. So firstly, countries that might need aid might need it because, firstly, if they have something called a trade deficit. So a trade deficit is essentially where they're spending more money than they're making from trade. So if they're buying in lots of goods from other countries and it's costing them more than the money they're making selling goods to other countries, they have what's called a trade deficit. And that doesn't really last very long in a country. So, I mean, imagine if in your bank account you get £100 a month or whatever it is you get, and you spend £110 every month, it's not going to last very long and you're going to start getting into debt, which is an issue. So countries that have a trade deficit need to borrow money. So that's where financial aid tends to be utilised the most. But you can also have aid for development, for things that you might want to develop. So it might not be because you've got a trade deficit and you need to stop getting in debt. It might be because you want to build better infrastructure, things like roads, airports, better schools, better hospitals, access to better, jobs, that sort of thing, housing. And so money can be provided to improve that. And amenities as well. And so again, the things we talk about amenities, like I mentioned schools and hospitals, but other amenities like electricity and gas networks and water networks, that sort of stuff is really, really important for countries to try and develop. Now, that could take the form of financial aid, but it also could take the form of expertise, because these things require, engineers and people that know what they're talking about to implement. And the last reason, really, why aid is needed is the one that springs to mind first in most cases, and that's because of natural disasters. Things like earthquakes or floods or droughts, hurricanes, are all things that can devastate communities and large parts of countries. And if it's a small country, even the whole country can be affected. So Haiti is a really good example of a place that suffers with not just earthquakes but hurricanes as well, and there are all sorts of problems associated with that. But those countries will receive aid to help them kind of deal with that. And that aid tends to be the more goods and expertise based aid, where people just need food and clean water to survive. Now, because there's different reasons for why you need aid, there are different types of aid that can be offered to help deal with the different problems. Broadly speaking, we have two main types of aid. Okay, so one of the types of aid is short term. So, it's fairly obvious this is something that you need for immediate short-term problems. And a good illustration is the top right image there. You've got someone that needs clean water because clearly it's either a country in conflict or it's had an earthquake or some natural disaster occurring there. And so you need clean water supplies, otherwise you'll die of thirst. So short-term aid, the point of it is to try and bring immediate or urgent relief to people who are desperate. It's sometimes called humanitarian aid. It's to protect life. So food, water, shelter, that sort of medical expertise, that sort of thing. So that's aid that's responding to a situation as it arises quite quickly. Now, often that's given by governments. It's also given by charities and voluntary organisations like the Red Cross or Oxfam. And it's probably the thing we associate most with aid because of things like Ethiopia, comic relief, all of that stuff is aid related, short-term aid related. Sorry. Now, the other type of aid, if you know that one is short-term, hopefully you've guessed, the next one is long-term aid, and long-term aid is the one that's much more associated with helping a country develop long-term. So sometimes it's called development aid. So short-term is humanitarian; it's protecting human life, whereas long-term aid is to help a country develop, so it's development aid. Now, the image on the bottom right there is kind of a version of the top right. Okay, it's both relating to water. The top right is someone that has bottled water or she'll die of thirst. The bottom one is a rainwater harvesting system. So they've used gutters and a system of pipes and probably a filter and something in there to collect as much rainwater as possible that falls on the area of their roof, which then gets stored in a container which reflects the heat away so it doesn't evaporate off, and it's got a sealed lid, etc. And it'll hopefully be free of disease and a fairly clean source of water because it goes through a filter. Now, this is something which isn't going to help people dying of thirst, but it is going to help people where things like droughts or dry weather conditions are common, because when the next time it does rain, they're in a better position when the next drought comes along to have their own water supply. So this is far more development aid. Now, often this sort of aid can be quite expensive. It's certainly more expensive than providing a bottle of water or two, but it doesn't have to be. And this is actually a good example of an inexpensive bit of development aid, a bottom-up development project, we'll call it, and more on that in another session. But often this type of aid, long-term aid, is generally associated with top-down stuff, and we're going to do more about top-down stuff in this session later on. It also includes stuff that is called FDI, foreign direct investment, and we're going to look at that a few times because it appears regularly over the course of the rest of this topic. So I'm going to explain what FDI and TNCs are in today's session, but also it's going to come back again later on. So we've looked at what aid is, why it's needed, and the types of aid that can be given. So we're now pretty clued up on one of the things that can be done to help countries overcome their problems with uneven development. There are other key terms that, like I say, I want you to have in your notes ready, and this is saved onto 365, but it's not in the right order. So this is a heads and tails activity where I'd like you to match up the key term with the correct definition, and I'll give you the answers in a minute. So pause the screen, get this from 365, okay, this table, and match up correctly the key terms TNC, FDI, top down, non-governmental aid, microcredit, and bottom up. Okay, try and put those together. When you're ready, unpause the screen and I'll go through the answers for you. Okay, so here are the answers. TNCs are that one. A company which operates beyond the borders of their own country. Not because they're, nice, but because they want to make more money, because they can access cheaper labour, cheaper resources, that sort of thing. FDI is money or income indirectly associated with investment. So a company, normally a TNC, will spend lots of money by building a factory in another country. Now that generates money and jobs for that country, which the TNC benefit from because they get cheaper labour and a skilled workforce, but it helps them develop because alongside it, they build roads and it helps improve education and incomes to those areas. So everyone benefits, it's win-win. But the TNCs are not doing it because they're being kind, they're doing it to get money, extra profits, okay? So TNCs and FDI are two things strongly linked. TNCs are the big companies, and FDI is money they basically invest into other countries so they can get some money back. Foreign direct investment. An investment is money back on what you're spending. Top-down aid is the bottom one there. Large-scale development projects like the Aswan High Dam. We're going to actually look at another dam project for our case study here. Non-government aid is there. Microcredit is a good example of a bottom-up development project. And other bottom-up schemes can be any time where aid is given through grassroots charities focusing on individual cases rather than focusing on big projects and like a huge dam. This helps a small village, a small location. Okay, so there are all your key terms matched up, all right? Now, this next task is again another bit of an independent one, and it's going to utilise pages 206 and 207, which are scanned in on 365 of the Highland Cow textbook. Now, what I would like you to do is just a summary table, that FDI coming up again, look, first one, just using the information in the book as much as you can. It won't all match and it won't all provide you with loads of detail, won't have you give you an example maybe, but just so you know what FDI is, fair trade, foreign aid, debt relief and remittances. Okay, so there's more key terms, I'm sorry. So that should take you a good 15 minutes to do. Give yourself sort of 2 or 3 minutes to read the pages of the book and just make some bullet pointed notes only about each of those 5 things that help reduce uneven development. Okay, so pause the screen, give yourself enough time to do that properly, and summarise in a little table, just the format I've given you, just through bullet points. Read through those pages and summarise them, and when you're ready, unpause the screen and we're going to start to look at a specific case study of a big top-down development project. Okay, so now you've got a good series of sort of things that will help countries reduce uneven development, and attracting foreign direct investment is one of those things, as well as some of the other things that we mentioned like remittances, etc. But you need to have in your notes a specific example of a top-down development project and a bottom-up development project, which we've already seen the definitions of. And today's session is going to focus on completing a top-down development project in its entirety. And we're not going to use India for this one actually, we're going to go to the Three Gorges Dam in China, which is, as you can see there, a very, very impressive structure. You run across that and back, you've done your 5k park run, which is pretty significant. And we're going to identify firstly what the reasons behind the dam were and where it is, but we're going to focus also on the benefits and problems associated with using top-down development projects, because this is top-down. So we needed a better definition of what we mean by top-down development projects to begin with. So here we go. What is top-down development? Bullet points, you need to write all these down please with this heading. Top-down schemes are usually expensive and large. They often involve a country getting loans from either an IGO, an intergovernment organisation, so like the World Bank for example, or from a company, a transnational corporation like Apple, Nike, Adidas, Coca-Cola or anything like that. Okay, so they're big, expensive, and they often involve a country getting a loan. Local people are told about plans, but they do not have any say in whether they happen or how they happen. So they're told this is going to happen, just so you know. Any thoughts? And then people will say, yeah, I've got this idea, I don't like it, and they'll be told tough. Okay, so essentially they have no say in whether or how it's going to happen. They almost always, not always, but almost always involve some sort of structure, high-tech structure that requires expertise to build and to maintain and to operate. So it requires an educated workforce. So it can involve lots of benefits to the host country, because they'll need to be educated in order to operate it. So it's win-win. Now, top-down, the idea of top-down is that it's meant to benefit loads of people, masses, like hundreds, if not millions of people in some cases, and this is one of those cases, through a top-down approach. So you build the thing at the top, the government decides and generates the wealth and the jobs, and all of the money that's generated by people's salaries and the knock-on effects of the trade that the country gets and the energy it produces in this case, it trickles down to those that are less fortunate. Now, when anything trickles down, it takes a while to reach the people at the very bottom. But when it does, the idea is that it's benefited millions rather than just benefiting a couple of people get clean water. So they're big, expensive, you have to borrow money to get them, and the locals have no say in the high-tech structures that are being built, but it will benefit potentially millions of people, and everyone from the top to the bottom will benefit. And that's just confirming IGOs, things like government banks, other agencies, and the World Bank are a well-known IGO. So you need all these notes, make sure you write them down, and then when you're ready you can move on. So now we know in principle what top-down development projects are. You need to have an example, and you've already seen an example of the Three Gorges Dam, an image of it. We're going to get more information for you on the Three Gorges Dam for you to complete. So that's what the rest of this session is going to be dedicated to. It is a long session, by the way, so if you were just planned an hour to do this, it'll probably take you quite a bit longer than that. So please feel free to just pause and pick up another time if you don't have the time now. So on 365 is an A3 sheet, just like this, that you can see on the screen, and it's got different aspects to it. Firstly, it's got what are the aims of the project. Then it's got where is the Three Gorges Dam located, with a map to the right. Then there's a little section that says conclude whether people are better off because of the top-down project or not. We're going to leave that till the end. And then you've got two tables. One of the tables shows the benefits of the Three Gorges Dam, and it's broken them up into social, economic, and environmental benefits. And the other one is the negatives, social, economic, environmental. You're going to get all the information you need for all of this except the conclusion bit, which you're going to have to do yourself. All right? So find that information sheet, and then when you're ready, you can move on to the next slide. So we're going to start with the top boxes. The aims of the project, the Three Gorges Dam, are listed here, so you can just get these notes directly onto your handout. It was designed to control flooding from the River Yangtze. It was designed to improve navigation of the River Yangtze for larger ships. So the big container ships that have masses of containers, they were able to access further up the River Yangtze because the Three Gorges Dam meant that the river was wider and deeper. And to generate hydroelectric power, or HEP, which is a green, very cheap, once it's established anyway, energy resource which reduces China's reliance on coal. So those were the three main aims of the project: control flooding, improve navigation, and generate hydroelectric power. And in terms of where it's located, again, I've done a nice summary for you, ready to go. If you're in class, we'd spend a bit more time doing this, but as you're doing this from home, you can just essentially read that and put it into that little box for the Three Gorges Dam location. So it's located in the Hubei province of southwest China. It says southwest. It doesn't look very southwest. It's clearly southeast, isn't it? Approximately 800 to 1,000 kilometers from Shanghai on the east coast. So that is a typo. Ignore that, please. It's the world's largest dam built in the Yangtze River. I don't think technically it is the world's largest dam now either. I think it's the world's largest power station. And construction took place between 1994 and 2003, and it cost a staggering $27.6 billion. Figures will vary. That said, it did pay for itself within about 3 years of being fully operational, so not that bad. So yeah, a couple of typos on here. Please ignore the fact it's not in southwest China, it's in southeast China. Here you can see that's clearly southeast, and it's not the world's largest dam, but it is the world's largest power station, hydroelectric power station. Apologies for that. Okay, so now you've got that. Again, if you haven't got it in time, just pause the screen to finish it off, and then you can move on to the next slide. So this is also provided for you on 365 alongside a YouTube video, which is a bit pixelated, I have to say, but it is saved onto 365 so you can access it. The first and absolutely most useful thing that I'd like you to do before you watch the video, though, is to use these statements, these 15 statements on the screen here, because what I want you to do is use these to complete the bit of your handout where you've got the little tables. So the benefits, socially, economically, environmentally, and the disadvantages, socially, environmentally, and economically. And please be mindful, there's a bell about to go, so just ignore that. So these 15 statements can go in one of those 6 categories. So the best thing you can do is read through each statement and decide, firstly, is it a good or a bad thing? Okay, is it a positive or a negative? And that'll tell you if it's on the left-hand table or the right-hand table. If you're not sure what I mean by tables, it's here, okay? This is the left-hand table, that's the positives. This is the right-hand side table, that's the negatives, okay? So that's where that information is going to go. So work out, is it good or bad? And that'll help you. The next thing you can do is then decide whether it's social, economic, or environmental. Now that's a bit more tricky, but still worthwhile doing, and it's a useful task to classify, because in an exam you could well be asked, identify the environmental impacts of a top-down development project, in which case you'd need to know all the environmental positives and all the environmental negatives, because they're the environmental impacts. If you start talking about stuff to do with the economy or social impacts, you're not going to get the answer right. So firstly, for example, I mean, it's easier than I've made it sound. So the dam protects farmland and people from flooding. That's a good thing. That's a benefit. It's on the left-hand table. All right. Now, once we've figured out good and bad, then you take it right. It protects farmland, things that people use to grow crops, and people from flooding. So what, it's protecting people's lives and their land and their homes. It's a social thing. Okay, so this is a social positive. This one is going to go in the social positives of that table. Okay, if you're not sure about what the difference between social, economic, and environmental is, I'll tell you now, just so you've got one recap. But either way, just put it into the good or bad, and that's at least something. Okay, so economic is easy because if it's to do with making money directly or jobs directly, it's economic. If it's to do with habitats or animals or pollution, then it's environmental, and anything else is social. So if it's to do with people's health, their happiness, their homes, infrastructure, education, it's all how they feel, their safety, okay, that's all social. Okay, so economic, money and jobs, environmental, animals, habitats, and social, everything else basically. So you now got all of this stuff that you can classify and put into the tables, okay, in the right places for you. So you've got a really detailed summary of advantages and disadvantages associated with the Three Gorges Dam project. Okay, once you've done that, okay, you can watch the video, which is saved on 365, or you can just try and copy and paste this YouTube link, or just type it in. But that's a really good summary, which is a documentary. It's only about 10 or 15 minutes, not very long, maybe even 20 minutes, but it's not a very long documentary, but that will talk you through some of the interesting people affected by the Three Gorges Dam project, both positive and negative aspects. Okay. Right, so get on with that, and when you're ready, you can unpause the screen. Okay, so the very last part of this really requires you to use, firstly, the bottom left-hand section of your handout, which is the conclude bit, and that's really going to help you with this particular essay type question. And you know what I like to do. I like to throw these in so you practice the 8-mark questions as often as possible, because it really does give you the benefits later on. If you can practice this and get really good at doing 8-mark questions, then it means that the hardest questions you get in a paper you can nail easily. So this is the 8-mark question that I'd like you to try and attempt. Evaluate a named top-down development project. Now the work is, the top-down development project is easy. It's the Three Gorges Dam, and all the information you need, you've just been doing. Okay, but because it's an essay that says evaluate, it needs a conclusion. Now the first thing is I want 3 paragraphs minimum, and each paragraph needs to be structured where you name something to do with the Three Gorges Dam. So one of the benefits, one of the aims of it maybe. The Three Gorges Dam is aiming to prevent flooding. Okay, then you describe it and you identify how successful it is in doing that with an extension and a stat, and maybe how it's unsuccessful or one of the negative impacts of it stopping flooding. So for example, it's prevented fertile silt from getting deposited further downstream, which has reduced crop yields. Okay, that sort of thing. Try and get a stat in there as well. You've got plenty of stats available from this session. Then do a second paragraph, another thing that the Three Gorges Dam aims to do. So it could be improve navigation for better shipping, or it could be generating hydroelectric power. Give me a positive, give me a negative, and develop them both with a stat. Now your conclusion hopefully will be fairly straightforward if you've done the bottom left box of the handout. If you've looked at the good and bad and you've decided overall do you think it's good or bad, that's really your conclusion done. If you want better advice in terms of structuring your conclusion, I'd urge you to get onto the GCSE revision folder in this YouTube channel, and there's a session that says writing a good conclusion, which specifically talks about evaluation conclusions and how to structure them. So if you don't know how to start your conclusion, then you need to get onto the how to write a good conclusion video. If you don't know how to start and evaluate 8-mark essay, you also need to go onto the 8 markers made easy revision PowerPoint that's on the GCSE revision playlist as well. Okay, but I've given you all the information in this lesson, which is a long one. I appreciate it's probably 2 hours worth of lesson, but you've also got videos that will help you build up an answer, a good answer and good practice for this particular 8-mark evaluate exam question. Okay, that is the end of this session, so well done for getting through it. Once you've completed that, feel free to email me and I'll give you feedback on it as soon as I can, or if you want to write it and bring it in next time you're in school, again I'll give you good feedback for it, so you've got some feedback and some response to your efforts with producing an 8-mark essay, which I know can be a bit daunting at times. Thank you for listening. That concludes session 6, and I'll see you next time for lesson 7, which is going to be looking at bottom-up development.